I mean, to be a system catalyst, I'd say it's about changing the systems and not trying to sell your tactic. Like, we don't have a lot of programs and services, right? Like, we're consulting and advising and connecting and networking and sharing knowledge. It's about building the relationships and making things move and getting them connected. That's going to have that catalytic change.
We can't fix the world alone, but collaborating isn't easy, and systems are allergic to change. So, how do we do it without losing our damn minds?
That is what we're here to find out.
I'm Jeff Walker.
I'm English Saul. Welcome to System Catalyst, the podcast that cracks the code for making the world a better place.
The Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Vivek Murthy, has called the current state of mental health as a defining public health crisis of our time. And the groups suffering the most are young people. Just to give you an idea, the rate of suicide among teens has increased almost 50% over the last several years. I could list off many more statistics, but I think we can agree things are bad and something needs to change. The thing is, like climate change or poverty, mental health is one of those issues that is so complicated that you can't solve it with a single magical solution. It's the kind of problem that requires widespread and drastic system change. Our guest today is John MacPhee. He's CEO of the Jed Foundation, a nonprofit that's changing the systems we use to treat mental health among young adults. Over 25 years, they've built a vast network of colleges and high schools that all use their holistic and evidence-based programs. We thought we'd have him on today to break down how he built those networks and how they then support local action. Networks are an integral part of system change, but they can be a daunting task. So this conversation is designed to demystify the process so that you maybe can start building your own support networks. John also talks about the role of antidepressants and gives advice to both system catalysts and donors. But first, he shares a bit of his own story. Like many change makers, he has a personal connection to the issue he's trying to solve.
First, I have a lot of experience around mental health challenges and addiction and substance use issues in particular. I come from a family that, alcohol has wreaked havoc on, unfortunately, and I've lost family members to drug overdoses. I also, when I was in college, struggled with my own mental health. I was very anxious. I didn't go to school. I tried to solve my problems with drinking. I was a problem drinker, all of these kinds of things. But I didn't have a language for it, and I didn't recognize it as mental health challenges, right? I just thought it was the way it was. But I'll just start there and say that these issues are issues that I have a lot of personal experience with and feel sort of comfortable in. I failed out of college. I got back into college, and I started my career. I did not know what I wanted to do. I think the only thing I wanted to do, Jeff, was prove that I was capable and smart. So I went to NYU at night, business school, had a great experience, performed very well there. I went to a pharmaceutical company because they would pay for my night school. Only reason. And I learned a lot there, and they had great training programs. And I saw that I had opportunities to sort of have a successful career, support my family. So I worked very, very hard. For years, I worked very hard, and I worked to learn all of the things I could possibly learn. But I didn't choose it. It wasn't my calling necessarily, right? I didn't know what my calling was. And then a couple of things happened. I feel like this is a long story, but then a couple of things happened. One, very important, the catalytic moment. My mother was diagnosed with cancer, and she died 5 months later. So she had conversations with each of us in the family, one-on-one conversations. Mine was the last conversation I ever had with her. And she told me that, and she said this very lovingly. It's not going to sound loving, but she said it very lovingly. She told me that all the money I was making, my car, my 8,000 square foot home, all these trappings of being a pharmaceutical executive were ransom. And that in her view, I had been sort of kidnapped and was being held for ransom by my lifestyle, by all of this. And she said, you wanted to be a math teacher and a basketball coach, and now you've been kidnapped and taken for ransom. That was the last thing my mother ever said to me.
Wow.
And it took me a lot of time to process that, because I'm like, wait, though, I'm very successful, and then I came to feel like she was right.
Soon after, John started volunteering for nonprofits and eventually made his way to the Jed Foundation.
So the Jed Foundation is in fact 25 years old, and it started when a family, the Satow family, lost their son to suicide when he was 20 years old. And while they did know that he was struggling, they did not realize that he was a threat to himself. And he was a student at the University of Arizona. And after he died, his parents really tried to put together the pieces and understand what happened. They came to learn that there were a number of people in his life, people at the school, friends, faculty, who were worried about him. But the dots were never connected. And so they found themselves in a conversation with the president of the University of Arizona. And he said to them, there are more than 30,000 students here. I want to create a mental health safety net, but I have no idea how to do that or what that looks like. Tell me what to do. Are there recommendations? And Phil and Donna did not know how to answer the question. And when they started to do homework on this question, and this was 1998, they learned that there was no model, there was no framework for what a school should do to support the mental health of students and reduce risk for suicide. And that is why they created the Jed Foundation. So that was the catalyst, that question that did not have an answer. So what the family did is they convened experts in mental health, suicide prevention, and higher ed to adapt this model, this successful model from the Air Force to the higher education system. And so that became the comprehensive approach to mental health and suicide prevention for colleges and universities. And it's based on the premise that every school should have a plan for how they support student mental health and reduce risk for suicide. They shouldn't just have a plan. They should have a planning process that is led by an interdisciplinary team. So the model recognizes that colleges and universities are complex organizations, and therefore there needs to be a broad team where mental health is a understood priority across all of the disciplines. And then this team works to implement these best practices.
The Jed Foundation tackles the mental health crisis from many different angles. They have the Jed Campus program John just referenced, but they also develop campaigns with direct input from their communities, support policy change, influence the media, and partner with various organizations. Now, some of you might be wondering, why go through all this effort when there might be already a solution to the problem in form of antidepressant medications? Like, hasn't this guy heard Lexapro or other SSRIs that are available?
Yeah. So actually, this topic is near and dear to me because I led the launches of Celexa and Lexapro when I was in the pharmaceutical industry. They're two of the SSRIs, and I think Lexapro is actually the most prescribed antidepressant in the world. So these medications can be very helpful, but they're not the answer by themselves, right? Again, if we step back for a second, mental illness, major depression, panic disorder, OCD, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder, 1 out of 5 people every year is going to experience a mental illness. And the age of expression for these mental illnesses is the teen and young adult years. And it can take a long time to get an accurate diagnosis and to get the treatment that someone needs. And it's really, really important that we have the systems in place to diagnose and then to treat. And these drugs can be very helpful. There is a lot of distress out there, macro-environmental stress, I would say, in addition to what I would call these sort of more organic mental illnesses. People are struggling with the grief and loss of COVID, with climate change, with war, with this pressure to succeed, this binary sense that you're either going to fail or succeed, school shootings, and then our lives have changed so much since 2010, 2011, when the internet met the phone, how we spend our time, dating, time outside, sleep. So it is really, really complicated. And, just going to the doctor, the doctor eye is not the answer. Well, it can be the answer in a particular situation, but it's not the answer at a systems level. But there are times where I feel like the mental health field is like in a small room trying to do what it can do with these walls. So for example, in Jed's high school data, the number one group of students that have poor mental health outcomes are those that say that their household is under significant financial distress. That is the best predictor of who's having mental health challenges among the young with the high schools we work with. So affordable housing, minimum wage, right? Universal health care, like the fact that we have millions of people who don't have health care. All of these things are mental health policy issues. And so if I could wave a magic wand, right, I would say everybody has to have health care. We need affordable housing. We need minimum wage, and we're making progress. But there are times where I feel like, what is available to us is small compared to what's sort of right over there that's big, but it's really hard to make that change. And I do feel personal frustration often about that. The other thing, though, if I could say about this, that happens is, so as you start to talk about these bigger things, these bigger policy issues, there'll be conversations about, well, is this mission creep? And, you should sort of stay in your lane. And I don't agree with that, because I think it is complex and it's dangerous to oversimplify things when they really are just, fundamentally complex. It's more important to try to understand the complexity than to try to oversimplify what's happening.
In other words, no amount of pills will get you to the root cause of the mental health crisis. For a problem as widespread and as complicated as this one, you need comprehensive system change. No way around it.
At this point, over 500 universities are currently participating in the Jed Campus program or have completed the Jed Campus program, and I'll walk you through what happens. So the first thing is that leadership has to commit to the program and name mental health and suicide prevention as a campus-wide priority. Then a team is set up, and that team includes mental health services, student affairs, athletics, buildings and facilities, res life, security, and students, right? And other disciplines. So the team can be 15 to 20 people all coming together to lead this project. Then data is collected. So the first thing that happens is we survey students using an instrument from the University of Michigan called the Healthy Minds Survey. So we understand at the student level their rates of depression, anxiety, flourishing, resilience, and also their particular attitudes and behaviors towards their individual school. Then the first domain is life skill development, because we know that the extent to which young people can navigate their own lives, advocate for themselves, problem solve, do normal life tasks like their laundry and cooking and these kinds of things, managing money, the better able they're going to be to navigate mental health challenges. So that's domain one. The second domain is about connectedness, belonging, reducing isolation. So we specifically look at the purposeful things the school is doing to foster connectedness and belonging among students. The third domain is about promoting help-seeking behaviors. So this is often thought about as reducing stigma, though it's more than stigma. It's creating an environment where it's okay not to be okay, and the students know when and how to seek help, right? So those are the first three domains, and you can see that those are upstream, sort of protective factors. Then the fourth domain is about using systems to notice if a student is struggling. So making sure that students and faculty and staff are trained to recognize signs of distress and also to respond to them. But also you can look at things like changes in grades. So you can put in edits. So if someone's grade goes up half a grade point or down, you can get them in front of a counselor because something has changed. Discipline should be thought of. So if there's some kind of infraction, the first question should be, what happened? What's wrong? Are you okay? And there should be mechanisms for students to tell the school if they're worried about another student. Then the fifth domain is about treatment services. So now or you believe this young person is struggling. So then how do you get them care? What kind of care does the school provide? When and why and how are they being referred out to other providers if needed? And then the policies around, when do you bring in the family? What role can the family play? Should the student leave school? Under what circumstances? When and how do you bring them back? So you can see this is very tactical, right? And then the next domain is about crisis. Schools need to know how they're going to handle a crisis before the crisis happens. So things like postvention protocols in terms of how you're going to handle a suicide death if one unfortunately happens, these kinds of things. And then the last domain is making sure that the campus is safe. So this is about physical safety, making sure that rooftops are secured. At Cornell, there are nets under the bridges. At NYU, they put barriers up in the library, right? Because we know that suicidal impulses are fleeting. We have to make sure we try to restrict access to lethal means. So wrapping around this model are the concepts of strategic planning, which I mentioned, and then also equity, really looking at who was the school built for, who was it not built for, and who in the context of that school might be facing additional stressors.
That's amazingly complete.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
can't imagine a university, when you all come in for the first day, would have half of those things complete in a good way. So can you talk about, I mean, how many years? I know they actually pay for their service because it's valued, and the need is there. You may want to talk about the need as well. I mean, I know the CDC had said that 1 out of 20 kids before the age of 21 attempt suicide.
Yes.
And others have ideations around that. So there's a big desire of the universities and parents and others to really start addressing this issue. How do you start? And how long does it take? And what's the kind of process?
Well, actually, it can take a long time for a school to decide to join our program. The leadership has to want to do it and be ready to do it. This has changed over time. And we launched the program in 2013, the end of 2013. And I remember at that time, I spoke to 2 different schools that are pretty much in any academic top 10 list, right? And each of these schools said, look, we really care about student mental health and we want to work with you. We're going to work with you, but can you please keep it a secret? We don't want anyone to know we're working with you because we don't want to be that top school with an over-indexing of applicants who have mental health histories because they and their families want to come to us. So let's just keep it a secret. And now, after these 10 years, pretty much every school issues a press release when they join the program.
Right. That's what I heard.
It's very, very different.
The Jed Campus program is a classic example of a system change approach because it employs as many campus resources as possible, including social programs, health services, faculty, and public safety. The result is an environment prone to save lives, like this school in Washington State.
At the school, a young student, a woman, had decided that she was, in fact, going to die by suicide, made a plan and was implementing that plan. She was seen by a security guard, a security officer at the school who had a feeling that something was wrong. And so he intercepted her, talked to her, asked her if she was thinking about harming herself, brought her to the counseling center, stayed with her, got her in the counseling center, got her self-care. And, she survived and got the care she needed. And that's an example of sort of how our system works, right? Because it's all the little things adding up to an intervention.
Recently, the Jed Foundation created a high school version of the Jed Campus program. But to build the same kind of network it has with colleges, the organization has had to adjust how it forges partnerships. Listeners, if you're looking to scale your organization, you may want to focus on building relationships, just like Jed did.
If we just step back for a second and sort of think about the scale involved here, there's about 3,100 not-for-profit colleges and universities. And we're working with, say, 520 or so. And that 520 number means they're in contract with us or they've been in contract with us for this technical assistance program. Many more schools use resources from Jed, but are not in that formal program. Our Jed campuses represent about 1/3 of the college students in the country. So we can look at that universe set and say, we can get to scale. We can get to a tipping point, right? But there's 40,000 high schools. So that's not, I don't want to sound unambitious, but that's not possible on a one-by-one basis. So we have formed a partnership with the Superintendents Association, which is called AASA, where we're working with school districts. We have our first 15 districts in our first cohort. And this is a program that from here forward, we're going to invest in significantly because it gives us an opportunity for much more scale.
And so superintendents are in charge of districts, right?
Yes.
And so they're able to have multiple schools and multiple high schools that you can penetrate.
Yes.
And put in these programs and work through the boards, which are hard to do on a one-to-one basis, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And a lot of the policies and policy changes that we advocate for need to be made at the district superintendent school board level. So there's just more leverage, at that entry point. The one thing we're experimenting with, and thus far it's been quite successful, is in Washington State, we partnered with a local nonprofit called Forefront in the Schools. And it is a mental health and suicide prevention organization local in Washington State. And we train them to implement our program. So they implement Jed High School to high schools in Washington State. And it's been a very successful model thus far. A lot of schools have participated. I think 23 high schools are working with them because of trust. They have the local trust in Washington State, and they're implementing our model. And so on the one hand, we're very excited about how well that's going. On the other, we've struggled to find other organizations around the country that we can implement that model with, that are sort of ready for it. But it's something that we're hoping to build out.
Well, and what we've seen over time is to scale, having locally empowered groups that you can be that network support for, but not have to run everything.
Right.
It's almost impossible in that top-down strategy. So I hope you succeed in finding more hand raisers, as a friend of mine calls them, who will be interested in doing that. If a person wants to do what you did, not in the mental health space, but just kind of like, wow, there's an interesting model here to go against issues of climate change or issues of homelessness or whatever that might be. How do they start? What do you think? Where would you go? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I think one place to start is really deeply, becoming a learner and making sure you really understand the issue and that you're connected to the right people, having the right conversations so that you really, really understand it. And then networking, building relationships, understanding all the players in the space is really, really critical. Building that reputation and building those relationships. And you don't need a lot of money at first to do that, right? You got to get in the right rooms and you sort of have to show that you know what you're talking about. I mean, to be a system catalyst, I'd say it's not. So like we don't have a lot of programs and services, right? Like we're consulting and advising and connecting and networking and sharing knowledge, but we don't have a lot of programs and resources. So I think that that's really important. I think that that's really important because it's about changing the systems and not trying to sell your tactic. It's about sort of, building the relationships and making things move and getting them connected. That's going to have that catalytic change.
Yeah. And just jumping into the scrum, right?
Yes.
Learning it, experiencing it, talking to people who are in the middle of it, and then seeing where you can be helpful.
Yeah. I'd also say aim high, like really aim high in terms of, we have great relationships with the Surgeon General, the Surgeon General's office, the CDC, all of these offices, really thinking through like who can make change and what can make change. So I'll give you just a sort of specific example. Like years ago, we said, wow, wouldn't it be something if the liabilities insurers for schools believed in what we're doing and advocated and endorsed our programs? And so we spent years talking to United Educators, who is the largest liability insurer for schools. We shared our data freely with them. And now United Educators gives a discount off their liability premiums to any school that goes through our program.
Oh, wow.
So I just use it as an example of, I'm not even sure we believed, sitting in that conference room when we had the idea that we could ever pull it off, but you had to sort of aim high and think about like, where's the leverage?
And then how about donors who are looking to get involved?
Well, I mean, we're grateful, of course, for all donors who get involved. We do call ourselves a foundation in our name, and that can cause some confusion, but we're a classic charity. So we're dependent on philanthropy and constantly raising money to do this work. This year, we'll spend about $25 million. We have about 95 people on our team. So that's that gives a sense of the scale. And what we really like are active donors who really want to, understand what we're doing and who stick with us for a long time, because this work takes a long time. So when I started at the Jed Foundation, the model existed, but there was no technical assistance. And the Poses Family Foundation, so this is Fred and Nancy Poses, they became very involved with us, with their team, and really studied what we're doing. And I agreed with them, but they were the first ones to say, you're a knowledge organization. You're not a change organization. You talk like you think you're a change organization, but you are not. You're a knowledge dissemination organization. And so they helped us really hands-on, but collaboratively design the Jed Campus program. And then they funded it. They funded the first phase of the Jed Campus program. And then very shortly after that, they gave us a follow-on grant and they said, you're going to hire a learning officer with this grant. And we actually said at the time, I'm embarrassed to say that, that we said this, like, That's a luxury. We have this program we have to build, right? They were like, no. If you don't hire a chief learning officer, you can't have this money. And that actually resulted in us building the infrastructure to have all the data we have now, and to have 10 years of data. Then a couple of other quick examples. Pivotal Ventures, Melinda Gates's team came into us on a confidential basis at first, and they said, we have been looking at the teen mental health field. Your Jed Campus program is very promising, but it is not proven in our mind. It's just promising. We want to work with you for 3 years. And what we want to do is fortify your program, like give you a boost of money so that you can make sure you have redundancies. You don't have like a key person risk, because we want this program to run well for 3 years so it can really be properly measured. And then they gave us money to further augment our evaluation abilities. That is directly tied to the results that we have. So I can look at 4 or 5 funders and say they played a very, very catalytic role.
Well, it sounds like you have another 20 years of opportunity ahead of you building these linkages. It's been great talking to you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it for today's show. Please don't forget to subscribe to System Catalyst so you don't miss out on the new episodes. Also, do us a huge favor by rating our podcast and leaving us a review. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you all in the next episode. Before we go, I'd like to thank our producers at Hueman Group Media. We'd also like to thank our incredible network of partners who are supporting our mission: the Skoll Foundation, the Aspen Institute's Aspen Global Leadership Network, Echoing Green, DRK Foundation, Maverick Collective, Virgin Unite, Charlize Theron Africa Outreach Project, Boldly Go Philanthropy, Synergos, Forward Global, Nexus, and New Profit. If you're interested in becoming a System Catalyst and would like to learn more about our partners, please visit systemcatalyst.com.